Without further ado, let me introduce Chris Young. Chris is the Chief Technologist at Microsoft. He's one of our premier sponsors today. He will be giving the opening presentation, and the tagline is Embracing the Bots, AI and Machine Learning in the Modern Data Center. Chris will also be one of the 7 participants on our panel. And if at the end of the day you haven't seen enough of Chris, he's going to also host a breakout Q&A session, which I'll also drop into after the panel. So Chris, thank you very much for doing all this today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hey Ken, thanks for having me, and I'm gonna go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Let's see, and in just a second, I apologize. I'm dual monitoring it here, so let me come over here so I can actually see you guys now. Ken, are we in good shape? Seeing my screen, Ken? All right, I'm going to go ahead and assume that everything's good. Somebody break in and text me if for some reason we're not sharing this live. But as Ken mentioned, I wanted to thank everybody for having me on today. Ken had talked a little bit about in the preface about agility, and I'm going to talk a little bit about AI and ML in the modern data center and how you can embrace bots to make your IT challenges a little less daunting. So to do this, I figure the easiest way is to cover a couple topics. Instead of doing a real deep agenda, I'm going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about some Butlers and then Star Wars, Tesla, and then maybe making some bucks. And just a little housekeeping item. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see the chats until afterwards. So if you have any questions, have Ken break in and stop me, or we'll follow up in the panel discussion afterwards. So as I go through this little presentation, see if you can recall these images at the end and see how I kind of weave them into a couple anecdotes. So first thing I want to talk about a little bit is why bots are important, right? And COVID-19 it's really changed the way that we do business. And it's driving digital transformation more than anything I've seen in my 25 years of IT. And, this used to be your old storefront and brick and mortar. When you wanted to spiff it up your customer interface, you would use tools like these. But what's happened with all this digitization now is in the day of COVID, now it's the App Store, Google Play and Apple, where you're pushing your apps out to your customers. This is your primary means of interacting with them now because everything has gone digital. And so it's a whole new set of tools to change your customer experience. And this gives you the opportunity to address a lot of back-end operations while you're changing the front. So that's why it's so important to talk about bots and what you can do to leverage AI and machine learning. So one thing I want you guys to consider, we were talking a few weeks ago as we were setting up this panel and sort of doing some rehearsals. One of the topics that came up was your CI/CD process and how long would it actually take for you to click the button and have code deploy to production. And so, when we think about that, it's that timeliness. You have some code, you're going to check it into a source code repository, push it through build systems, test it, and then have it deployed to your data center so that your customers can use that new feature that you've just built into your applications. And if you're using something like AWS Code Deploy or Azure Pipelines, you say, "Oh, this is pretty easy. I can do this fast and quickly." But what I want you guys to do is consider not your that nifty new cloud native app, but your most complex hybrid IT or a legacy integrated app that's tightly coupled. And so how long would it take you? And we're talking here maybe something that uses an I-Series, an AS400, or a Z-Series mainframe as opposed to that cloud technology. How long would it take you from the time that you hit the button with that legacy app, from checking in your code until it's actually deployed, right? And so with those cloud tools, we might say it would be seconds. Is it minutes? In reality, it's probably hours or maybe even days for you to roll out new features when you're dealing with a tightly coupled architecture. And that's really what we want to talk about, how to use bots to address that. So something a little bit for you guys. Let's talk a little bit about another topic that came in above and beyond just CI/CD is, let's talk a little bit about your annual performance goals. And maybe this is employee MBOs. And so is your boss asking you to track measurements, or are they judging you on metrics about time to market, how quickly you can push those new apps to production? Or maybe it's MTTR if you're worried about keeping a data center alive and healthy, and everyone's trying to wring out cost. So are these the things that you're being judged upon by your management? And I've been talking to some of my buddies who are who work for large banks, and one of the guys told me that his boss, his MD, actually wrote into his performance plan for this next year that he has to start taking advantage of AI and ML in the course of his job. And so what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about how you can bring AI, ML, and process automation to your daily activities and help you meet your management objectives. So we'll talk a little bit about that and cover all of these different kind of concepts through a series of analogies. So one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about here was airlines, right? And airlines are a great example for streamlining CI/CD. And as everyone knows, they were probably one of the industries that was most heavily affected by COVID. Not only did they suffer that instant loss of customer demand, but they've also got a fairly complex business model with tightly integrated services where it might take 30 or more systems to put a body on a plane. And what that means is when they're deploying new application code, it's heavy testing with a lot of labor. And when you think about QA and making sure those apps are ready to go to market, you're really talking about three things. You're talking about functional testing, where you make sure that the application operates as intended, all the buttons are working and everything functions as it's planned. The next piece is performance engineering, where you make sure those systems can sustain load and that nothing breaks when you throw a bunch of volume at it. And then finally, there's the security piece that's making sure you're not susceptible to any vulnerabilities and that you keep that customer data safe. And so even before COVID, these things were a very daunting task for a lot of airlines. And they couldn't go to production quickly with these. They might only be able to get through 6 CI/CD cycles monthly. And really what was happening was developers were able to develop the apps quicker than what QA could test it. And so QA was becoming the bottleneck. And obviously, when PPP, their belts tightened, and when PPP ran out, they simply didn't have money to spend on those additional bodies. So they had to embrace the bots and fill in those gaps where they didn't have enough humans. And so testing is a great way to leverage AI. One of the things that you can do as part of your CI/CD process and embracing that digitization is to use AI to automatically create testing scripts. And you have a test plan with a bunch of test case data inside of it, maybe an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of with a bunch of customer data in that you want to make sure that the application functions as intended. You can have AI derive those scripts that actually do functional testing and performance testing in one swoop. So run through that Excel spreadsheet, type all the stuff very, very quickly into the systems, and load test it and make sure that it works. Now, on the other side of this thing, once the tests have passed from a functional and a performance standpoint, that's where you can leverage the static code analysis tools and DAST. Once it's deployed, actually check it and make sure that it's not vulnerable to SQL injection hacks or whatever. And this can all be integrated very tightly into your Jenkins or your normal build processes. And so what happens after you start embracing these bots is very simple. Now QA can consume as quickly as dev. So now they're not the bottleneck anymore. And really, it's all about making that continuous integration and that continuous deployment truly continuous without humans involved. So the next analogy that I'm going to use is I'm going to talk a little bit about Tesla Autopilot. And if any of you guys are familiar with Teslas, here's a little screen from a Tesla 3. And when you're looking at this screen, you kind of get a flavor for what it takes for a computer to replace a human's decision-making capability. So, there's lots of sensor activity that's going on here. We're looking at things like speed and, how close you are to the cars in front of you, what the lane traffic is like, a bunch of functional attributes about the car's mechanical components and everything else. And so the whole idea behind Tesla Autopilot is to make it so that the human can take their hands off the wheel and that the car can watch these sensors and drive the car automatically without the human being involved. And when you think about it, that's a great analogy for data centers because for a long period of time, IT systems have been able to generate tons of sensor data. We're talking memory, CPU information, event logs, service starts and stops, right? And there's a plethora of vendors out in the marketplace that can provide dashboards to be able to visualize that. But where this becomes extremely complex is replicating the human brain's capacity, is going to require a little bit more than just watching screens, right? It's basically harnessing the sensor data, distilling it down into actionable decisions, and then executing upon them. And that's where you can leverage some of the emerging technologies like AI and ML, and then orchestration components that you might be using today. And this is all combining these two is what Gartner has coined a term called AI ops. And you might know this by other names, maybe RPA or but what it really entails is it's all about watching KPIs from your infrastructure and then doing a baseline over time to look at what those things look like. And then when things get out of whack with the baseline or look like they're moving in a negative direction, be able to course correct and do that automatic remediation. And we'll talk a little bit about that remediation in just a few moments. But what this really is, this human is sort of mimicking the human brain and humans being able to decision make off of baselines and things that they know are between the guardrails. That's all what Autopilot is. And so what we want to do is help you guys take and put Autopilot on your data center. So talking a little bit about that RPA and being able to leverage bots and actually make those changes to systems, we'll discuss this in terms of what RPA is, and RPA are really those software robots that mimic the UI-based human actions so that you can automate everyday tasks. And this is where you can make a lot of hay removing labor from your organization and be able to do things more efficiently with bots, right? And if you look at the typical RPA solutions, they usually involve three things. They have a studio where you essentially record the activity. So you sit down as a developer or a business analyst and you have the robot watch you do the work. And as you model that task for the robot, it's watching everything that you're doing. And then it creates that and compiles a set of code that mimics all your activities. Once you have that code, then you have the functional robots themselves. This is the execution layer that will execute those robotic tasks. So whatever that human is doing with their mouse, it's able to do those exact things, but do it on an execution engine as if it were truly a human. And then finally, usually these components contain an orchestrator where you want to take the work of several robots, just like a complex workflow might involve multiple humans across many different functional areas. You need to be able to orchestrate that and have the bots and sort of stitch that together. And so the orchestrators come in to help you take those small units of work and then turn them into more complex workflows. And so when we talk about those UIs that we want to mimic, what are they? What are we talking about here? Well, one of the biggest things that RPA should probably be able to do is to reach into things like thick clients. So your average person is working in Office for a lot of the day, or they might be working with PDFs, sending emails, analyzing Excel spreadsheets. So you need to be able to reach inside and control those thick clients and be able to do exactly what the human is doing on their screen. One of the next pieces, obviously, as we talked about, sort of those hybrid or maybe legacy systems, you've got terminals. That could be SSH terminals for all your Linux admins, or it could be just a mainframe terminal or an AS400 where people are keying in business data, right? But you want to be able to have the bot mimic terminal activity as well. And then finally, what's the last type of application that people generally use? Browser-based apps, being able to go in and instantiate Chrome and walk through a whole workflow within a series of HTML pages. And the good RPA tools will be able to take these units of work against all of these different types of UIs, and they'll be able to turn them into APIs that you can then call from downstream systems. And that's where we get into the final piece, which is sort of the orchestration components, right? You have those bots. Those bots do minimal units of work. How do you string them together into a workflow that mimics, the human's activity for the day? And so, here's an example of that. It looks very much like Visio, being able to drag and drop your little bot operations on there. The great orchestration tools will have a large library where you can, leverage a bunch of canned activities and maybe APIs into common systems like, ServiceNow, or be able to go to Azure or AWS and spool up virtual machines. But they'll have a library in addition to the bots that you build, a canned set of libraries that, can connect to all of your IT systems internally. And then any part of, anything that you're doing inside of orchestration, you probably need to design it for failure, being aware that, some activity might not be able to complete, and a human will move on to another task, but a bot needs to be instructed on what happens. And so you string these things together with a series of sort of check gates, and anytime there's a failure, be able to remediate that failure. Finally, if you're using orchestrators, your IT departments or the different business units out there might be using their own orchestration tools. And we're talking about things like Puppet or Chef or Ansible, perhaps. Wouldn't it be great if you can take the workflows that they're already creating, those little nuggets of work, and be able to string them into your orchestration? So that orchestrator of orchestrators. And then finally, anything that's created in any one of these workflows, a great orchestration tool will be able to let you edit that in a text-based, in a text-based system. So because you're using, TextPad or Notepad, you can actually create infrastructure as code. Great example is if you've ever used AWS or Azure templates for building out your infrastructure. This is kind of the same concept, but for your internal IT workflows. And so that's kind of it with the bots. I've covered a lot of topics. I'm just going to kind of recap sort of the topics that we covered here and the images that we displayed earlier. And so we talked about a couple core metrics that you might be judged on. First being that CI/CD process and being able to deliver new app functionality to your customers very quickly. How can you leverage bots, R2D2 hooking to Jenkins to be able to automate that testing and remove human bottlenecks? And when you do that, you're making that deployment truly continuous. There's no human involved anymore. And what that really means to your customers is you're speeding up that CI/CD cycle time so that you can get functionality into your customers' hands quicker. Secondly, MTTR, that's that put your data center on autopilot. Baseline your operations with AI ML, and then have machines sort of watch those KPIs, and when they start getting out of whack, be able to proactively adjust and self-heal accordingly. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow your humans to not be doing mundane, keep the lights on activity anymore, they'll be able to work on the innovation up here and creating those, you know, new customer features that you want to get to market. And then lastly, we have the embrace the bots to wring out the expense, that RPA, and be able to automate what a human does. So replacing the mouse jockeying with a bot that's gonna do it, and turn that activity into an API and microservice that can be you know, orchestrated into your existing workflows and maybe called by your front ends. So that's it. And when you do all of these things, you will be able to go to your manager and you'll be able to check the box on leveraging that AI, that ML, and the process automation to make your processes more efficient. So thank you for allowing me to present, and I'll be on the panel here for the next few minutes if you guys would like to talk about any of these topics.